Thank you, Pearl, for this interview. And before we start to talk, I want to let you introduce yourself. Who is Pearl Means?
Thank you, Juan. It's a real honor to do this interview with you and to speak to our people. My name is Pearl Denetclaw Daniel Means. I am the widow of the late Russell Means. I'm Dene. The Spaniards called us Navajo, and that's what we're known throughout the world by today. My people encompass their homeland. Our homeland encompasses portions of 3 states, Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. We're the largest nation, and we come from clan systems. My clan is the Ashini, the Salt clan, and the Kiani clan, which was one of the 4 original clans of the Dene people. I come from a family of 8. I have 3 children and many, many grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
In my experience of this communication working by my people in the Andean world, interviewing to Russell Means was the greatest experience I have, because even affected me in the personal way. She gave me a lot of reflections about my own life and my own work with my people. So Russell means a lot for all the indigenous people. And I want to ask you, what is for you the experience to be life mate from Russell Means?
What a beautiful experience. I'm reminded of the conversation I had with Oliver Stone, who is a renowned American director who directed Russell in Natural Born Killers. He asked me one time, what was it like being married to Russell Means? And I said, well, there were never 2 days alike. And he said, I would have guessed that. And I said, it was terribly exciting. And he said, I would have guessed that as well. Russell had the unique ability to parlay his message through various means, politically, legally, artistically, culturally, educationally. He was a very gifted man, and he came from the heart. Therefore, he was termed controversial, and all he ever did was speak the truths. And in fact, I was giving a lecture at a university in Illinois. They were offering this beautiful exhibit of some of Russell's work. And the body that we were focusing on at that event was what Russell called Indian Killer series, where he took 12 alleged American heroes from George Washington to Custer, Daniel Boone, etc., etc., and he did narratives. He did their portraits, and then he did narratives as to who they really were. Well, as I was giving the opening of that event, I said, there's something wrong with a society that calls the truth controversial. What kind of a society is that? And I said, that's all Russell Means ever did, was he spoke the truth. And he was termed controversial.
I want to bring another point about Russell Means wisdom. In my nations, Well, in the Andean world, the Tahuantinsuyo was the name of the biggest nation in all this place in South America. And usually when academic or historians talking about the beginning, the origin, this country, they talk about Manco Cápac and Mama Ocllo. They are founders. Manco Cápac and Mama Ocllo. So that was the oral traditional of my people. But the historians make us forget this. For years and years, when they talk about the history, they talk about the war, the leaders, the killers, whatever. They make us forget this.
Well, that's the beauty of us as indigenous peoples. We're oral societies. And we're charged with continuing sharing our history, our teachings from generation to generation, where the invader comes from a literate society, which is only utilizing one side of the brain. That was another quote that Russell Means would often say in his public speeches, words to the effect that the white man only uses part of his brain, and he's the first to admit it by saying, it's left brain versus right brain. And in an oral society, at a very young age, we are utilizing both sides of the brain, the right and the left. So they're fully developed. And that's why we are excellent artists, athletes, academics, should we choose. And the list goes on. And that's all part of dumbing down of a people, is to disconnect their history. And they did this brilliantly through Christianity. That was the beginning of a lot of the disconnect and the repressing of the female was through Christianity.
You're right. I remember when in the history the teachers told us about the Incas' spiritual way of life, religious, they start to say that we have a god, the name a sun. So because we tell them we are sons of the sun, they believe that we are telling about the son of God. And it was convenient for them the image of the male God. But yes, when you go into the real, all the indigenous tradition in the Andean culture, every day you will find the word for all spirituality. It's the connection with the Pachamama. Pachamama is Mother Earth, is female. That's every day or tradition of rituals in the honoring the water, the wind, the mountains. Everything is because Pachamama. So we are matrilineal way of life too. We are brothers and sisters. We are relatives. In America, we have the same way of lives, but we need to remember, and that's why I was really impressed when the Russell Means put in the table this topic and talk openly and comfortable about this matrilineal way of life, how much we need to learn about it. Could you teach us a little bit more about it?
Oh, I'd love to address matrilineal social systems. First, I want to say that my people, the Dene, we all have creation stories, our origins, that the oppressor just disregards as a myth, a legend. you know, and yet they're very sophisticated, very insightful oral stories of our origin. And with the Dene people, my people, we come from white shell woman. Russell's people, the Lakota, that the white man calls the Sioux, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and that encompasses a great region from Canada down to South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, Montana, North and South Dakota. In any event, their spiritual teacher was White Buffalo Calf Woman. She's the one that manifested with the 7 sacred ceremonies for the Lakota, and that was their spiritual direction. And Russell spoke often of these, and toward the last few years of his time with us, he and one of his writing partners, Byard Johnson, put into book form, "If you've forgotten the names of the clouds, you've lost your way." And it was Russell's Handbook on American Indian Thought and Philosophy. And this is if you can get a shot of it, this is what the book looks like. It's also, it was first published as an ebook, and his partner and I published it in book form a couple of years ago. And let me just read to you from it something that Russell described as matriarchal time. "The universe, which controls all life, has a female and male balance that is prevalent throughout our sacred grandmother, the earth. The balance has to be acknowledged and become the determining factor in all of one's decisions, be they spiritual, social, healthful, educational, or economic. Once the balance has become an integral part of one's life, all planning, research, direct action, and follow-up becomes a matter of course. The goals that were targeted become a reality on a consistent basis. Good things happen to good people. Remember, there is no such thing as time. Therefore, time is on our side." So, Russell was the first to speak out publicly, passionately about these different social systems. The oppressor, the invader, coming from one, which was patriarchal, and the indigenous peoples the world over coming from matrilineal systems. This does not mean that the female controls, dominates. It is not the flip side of the coin of patriarchy. In fact, Russell described it very well a few years back as he was being interviewed in Italy for a documentary. And they asked him to describe these two constructs. And he said, patriarchy is linear. It runs in a straight line. And it's relatively recent in comparison to matrilineal systems that flow in a circular motion. So he said the patriarch is going off the cliff. And we, indigenous peoples, come from that worldview where everything is connected, everything is interconnected, everything has a cause and effect. So we have in our primitive societies, which he loved very, very much, he would often say, the white man calls us primitive, and I am a born-again primitive. I know the origin of prime, meaning first. Everything that is sacred and holy is circular. Grandmother the earth, all of the stars, the moon, the sun, the raindrops, the human form, everything that is sacred is holy and round, connected, interconnected. Now, in these matrilineal social systems, we recognize the difference between the male and the female. We think differently, we process differently, we behave differently, we have different responsibilities. We adhere to gender roles. And I know in the dominant society that's a bad word, but we are different. We recognize those differences. When you recognize those differences, you can then respect those differences and celebrate. That becomes very powerful when you can celebrate the differences and know that we need both male and female. So it's a very ancient way of life. It's a very balanced way of life. We only took what we needed, and we did it respectfully. We did it gently. We did it with prayer. I'm now remembering a really powerful teaching that Russell spoke of, and it's applicable to all of us to remember. And this came from his mother when he was a young boy, looking up at the birds and was pondering who they are, the winged, and had asked his mother a few questions around life. He was about 5 years of age. And what she told him, and I'm paraphrasing it badly, I know she said it very eloquently, but what she shared with him is that all of life has a function and a place, and we have to understand that and respect it, and broke it down into the various kingdoms: the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom, and the fact that human needs each one of these kingdoms to survive. Yet without one of them, the human is not able to survive. So that tells us in a really powerful way where we are within that mosaic of life. And when we understand that, we're going to operate very humbly, respectfully. Because without human, all of life would flourish. And the invader, according to his journals, when he landed on Turtle Island in the Americas, he marveled at the beauty. He described it as a paradise. It looked untouched, and yet there were millions and millions of us. Another interesting fact of matrilineal social systems, culturally, historically speaking, the old women, we go through 4 periods of life as human. And the last period is when we move into as women, we move into our full power. And that's when we're no longer having our menstrual cycles, we're no longer having to balance the fluctuating hormones. And it's those women that move into that place of authority that collectively appoint and removed our leaders. Because we know each member of the family can be replaced except the mother. So a female never puts herself in harm's way because her first responsibility is to her children, to her family, and the continuance of that. And so it was the old women. And in Western society, after menopause, we're throwaways. And yet this is when we come into our full power, because we're seeing, we're feeling, we're hearing, we're experiencing all of life. And we don't have the same challenges that our male counterpart has with the ego self, because we give life. And as soon as you give life, as soon as that life is growing within us, it's no longer about us. Our concern and focus is for that life. And it continues, and it continues. Once we're a mother, we're always a mother. That umbilical cord is connected. There's something going on with any of my children, I know, I can feel it. And that's a beautiful thing that we celebrate in our cultures. And the Lakota have actually a couple of their 7 sacred ceremonies that's based on coming into balance with the female. One of them that's practiced and is known about throughout the world now is the Inipi, and the white man crassly calls it the sweat lodge. Well, it's a purification experience. And it was a way for the men to purify the best they could from within, in respect, out of respect for the female. We're the only species that the Creator granted us the natural purification every 28 days. We purify naturally. So this was the concept of the Inipi, was for the men to be able to purify the best they could to come back into balance. Another very well-known, celebrated sacred ceremony of the Lakota is the Sundance. And these are all in this last book that Russell did. If you've forgotten the names of the clouds, you've lost your way. He talks about the Sundance being one of the principles of that is for the male, and it's a male ceremony, and now I know women are doing it all over the world, but it was intended for the male to come into balance again with the female and to understand the best they could, to have a glimpse of what we go through 9 months with child and then giving birth. So they dance 4 days, sun up to sunset, without food and water. After that period, then they pierced and they gave of flesh, which is symbolic of us as women giving birth. So again, very powerful ceremony that was given to them by white buffalo calf woman. And again, our focus was all about coming into balance.
Yeah, it's amazing. Let's see. One of the biggest message that I get from Russell too is understanding for us really clear that one thing is the revolution in the indigenous way of life, and another different thing is the revolution in the white man way of life that they making a mass all around the globe right now with all this violence. So Russell Means was powerful message about the peace and about the way how we can handle it, the revolution, like indigenous people. How you can tell us about us?
Well, Russell Means, through his autobiography, Where White Men Fear to Tread, you can get a shot of that.
Yeah.
Um, it's on its 20th printing. It's the most complete body of work in the latter part of the 20th century that speaks to the Indigenous struggle through Russell Means's eyes experience as a prominent leader of the American Indian movement. And he was also the lifelong member of the International Indian Treaty Council. They were given instructions back in 1974 by the old people, when we still had our old people who were connected. As the best way to describe it is, when you connect the heart with the brain, when you can make that connection, is where you come into this balance, wisdom, knowledge, experience, all of that. That connection is what you're forced to do when you come from oral societies. And that ensures that as the young mind is developing, it's utilizing both parts, the right and the left brain. The invader calls the right brain the artistic female side, and the left brain being the intellectual male-driven side of the brain. In fact, Russell used to say publicly in his speeches that the white man is a half-wit, and he admits it. He only uses one side of his brain. And that's how he designed all of his institutions, from his religions to his educational systems, and the design behind that was control. You can control a people by keeping them in fear. And Russ called it the dumbing down of humanity. And that's what they successfully did with their institutions, was to create that disconnect. And and they did it with their women. As women, we have been oppressed longer than any race of people, and that was their fear, was that as women, as mothers, we have that innate ability, and the Western society calls it intuition or instincts, whatever. We call it power, the female power. Well, when the Europeans targeted us, they targeted our men and all but crippled them, not knowing that we come from these ancient matrilineal social systems. We have survived. Granted, we in American, we are less than 1% of the population. That's 99 point something percent genocide.
We need to talk about our children, right? The one of the powerful messages also the Russell Means say is, take your children in control. Don't let them anymore to the oppressor take your children. That means the educational system have to be based in our own culture, and we have to take total control of this children educations. How you can explain to us the experience that I think you already have in Pine Ridge with this treaty school, and based in which project in mind Russell was trying to push and make possible this experience.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up, because it's very, very important, and it's something that I'm working diligently on as we speak. Russell had several attempts in starting his total immersion school in language and culture. And, you know, Russell had this bigger than life energy. And often his people thought if Russ was doing it, then he doesn't need our help. He can do it. Well, he put all of his money into it. He couldn't get the support that we're so colonized that we're conditioned to accept the crumbs that the invader offers us. And to step out on our own is scary. And that's what, that was all part of Russell's message of freedom and sovereignty. And he tried every means possible to empower his people. And in fact, he would often say, a leader can only move as fast as his people are willing to move. And that was very, very frustrating toward the end of his time with us. I remember he said to me, hon, I feel like I'm hitting my head against a brick wall. He said, my people won't wake up. Americans won't wake up. Humanity won't wake up. And I know this was very, very frustrating for him. But back to the concept, back in the 80s, the early 80s, Russell went to New Zealand, and he saw the early total immersion schools that they were developing. And incidentally, they had looked to us, the Dene people. At that time, we had these language programs. Rough Rock Demonstration School was the one that they visited, and they were really inspired by it. And then what they were also doing in Ireland, because they were on the verge of losing their language. So they modeled their programs after these two cultures. And what they ended up with is a really successful model. The Hawaiians did the same thing, and of course we know that they're very closely related, first cousins. And so Russell saw how empowering this was for the children. I mean, when they stood and they sang and they spoke, they just emanated with this self-confidence. They knew who they are as Maori children. So he came back, went throughout Turtle Island, speaking at Indian education conferences, and everybody was just patting him on the shoulder. Oh, good luck, Russ. Good idea. Well, nobody would take him seriously. So that was he saw it, and he knew that was the answer to grab a hold of our children, we still have our practices and our culture, and our languages are on the brink of extinction. Linguists ascertain that at 65 is when the last of the language speakers, once they reach that age, you've lost the language. And when our statistics are coming back at life expectancy, which was lowest with the Lakota people, Russell's people, it's staggering. I believe it's 52 to 57 for females and around 44 for the males. So your language is all but gone. And what we're seeing today are all of the atrocities in Indian country, the poverty, the health problems, drugs, sexual abuse, the violence, all of that permeates throughout Indian country. And when I was back there in February, and still the racist, in-your-face situations that are targeting our young people. And this particular incident was a reservation had bussed in their children to watch a hockey game in Rapid City. And in box office seats above these children were some non-Lakota men drinking beer. And the Lakota children did not stand for the national anthem. Understand, this is not our government. This is our country, not our government. And that flag represents the government. So they didn't stand. And these, as Russell would term them, Neanderthals, they poured beer on the heads of these students. Can you imagine what that must have felt like for these 10-year-olds? Well, of course, we all came together and rallied and demonstrated and made our demands and met with the politicals and all of that. The same week, there were 3 suicides. This is on Pine Ridge. 12-year-old, 13-year-old girls, and a 15-year-old. I sat down on my bed and I cried and I prayed. And I said, what can I do? What can I do? I asked for Russell's guidance, direction. Well, it was about 30 days later, I found myself in New Zealand. The Maoris brought me in as a guest speaker of a beautiful symposium they were having around health, grabbing a hold of their health. They are projected within the next 5 years to have the highest rate of obesity per capita from any place in the world. And they recognized they needed to grab a hold of that. Well, it was a think tank of sorts. What was interesting was they brought in people, leaders, their leaders, in all aspects of their society, their life. Education, health, housing, economics, all of it, arts. And the second day, and I was speaking on the last afternoon, I was the keynote speaker. And what I realized that second day is, wait a minute, 2 things that I'm recognizing. All of these leaders are in their early 40s-ish. They came out of those first total immersion schools. They're leaders. They all spoke their language. And when you're speaking your language, that ignites what we call the little people in our blood. The DNA starts connecting. And they were utilizing this holistic approach to wellness, that it's just not what Western medicine tries to brainwash us to believe. It takes that holistic approach, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, and the physical is just the manifestation of that. So I was so empowered to see that and to be a part of that. Well, in 2017, they're hosting the Global Indigenous Wellness Conference. And I feel very honored that I was part of that early think tank. And so I went back home and I knew that was the key. That is the key. We've got to grab a hold of our children, our language, and through that, we can again rise as the beautiful, distinctive peoples that we are. And so right now, I'm very, very close. I have a verbal commitment for funding for the total immersion education program that Russell wasn't quite successful in creating during his time with us. So I'm very, very excited about that. And, you know, it's like, it's the past, we're almost going on 3 years. October 22nd will be the 3rd year anniversary of Russell's transition. And, you know, the way we view it is, it's not death, it's a change of worlds. Yeah. And I'm really, really understanding his work, his messages now. You know, I walked with him, I worked with him, I knew it, but it was more intellectually. Now I'm feeling it. It's resonating in my being. And something that Russell said to me toward the end of his time with us is he said, "Hun, we're moving into a new energy. It's the female energy. And there's much work that can be done there." And so when I think about that, I understand he came to be with us during a very volatile time in America and the world, and igniting and opening, forcing these doors, knocking them down. He took up arms twice. Once in his homeland, 1973, the siege at Wounded Knee, and then again in Nicaragua with the Mosquito Sami indigenous peoples. And he would say, you know, he was termed a revolutionary. And he said, "Yes, I am a revolutionary. I understand what revolution means. It means returning to the point from which you began." And that's what he realized. The tactics of the oppressor didn't work. There's no point in us trying to emulate that because it doesn't work. And when he philosophically realized the power was returning to who we are as indigenous peoples, that's the key. And so what I feel and know, now that we're in this new energy that we call the female energy, we also, our prophecies talk about this time, and it's referred to as the fifth world energy. It's heightened, it's refined. It is one that resonates with love, compassion, nurturing, respect. And there lies our balance. And that's what we need for ourselves. And that's where we start. It can be so overwhelming. But if we think of it in terms of starting with us, what's in our heart, reconnecting that brain with the heart, it impacts our family, our community, our nation, and then it continues out into infinity. So if each one of us can grab a hold of that concept and recognize it and be receptive. You know, we pray and then we meditate. And the meditating, we call it going within, quieting the mind to go within. And when we can do that is when we're given direction. And when we listen to that, it becomes heightened. And pretty soon it's just a natural course of our life. And there we can come back into balance. And because Grandmother the Earth is cleansing and evolving, and she's going to do it with or without us. And the first step is to let go of that fear. You know, it was the invaders' construct of control, is to keep humanity and fear. And they didn't understand the indigenous connection with Grandmother the Earth, but they knew it was powerful. They saw it, they felt it, and they had to destroy that. Thus the atrocities that continue to this day. But it's a beautiful time. It's a time of great hope. And I think if each one of us goes within for our direction, we'll know what to do, how to do it. And it becomes the domino effect. Because what we think is so powerful, what we feel goes out and continues that ripple effect. In closing, I want to share with you, because I know your audience is the Indigenous, and that's who I am. And that was who Russell Means was. And one of the last ceremonies, one of the last communication that Russell Means gave us happened in a ceremony. I believe it was early December of 2014. I was in that ceremony with our First Nations people in their homeland. And I was still really struggling with the grief, the loss. And I was really honored to be part of that ceremony. And at the very end, the holy man, the shaman, gave me a Lakota pipe, filled it with tobacco, asked me to smoke it. And I did. Gave respect all four directions. And then there was this very, very powerful feeling, energy that came through me, and I knew it was Russell. And so I said to the holy man, I said, Russell has messages. And he said, go ahead. So what came through was, first he said, the English language is the least expressive language. Therefore, it's used in international commerce. The indigenous languages hold the code to the DNA. He said, my message about freedom and sovereignty is with the individual. Each one of you emanates a beautiful light. And collectively, you're an awesome sight. You all the same color of blood. Mitakiwasan. We're all related.
We often hear, I always see even encounter ceremonies that talking about encounter between the condor and the eagle. Unfortunately, the way how this movement going is put to the eagle or represented to the Western civilization and the condor to the indigenous civilization, and we got to go to encounter. It seems like the patriarchy that's going linearly straight toward, and the matriarchy in some point they're gonna to encounter. For me, it doesn't work. For me, the idea the encounter between eagle and condor is encounter reconnected to the family who was broke for the invasor in the north of America and south of America. We are more related than they told us. I found even the works in Quechua, in my language, in the Lakota people. I found many, many signs that tell us we are deeply related. So we got to go to encounter between the condor and eagle, that means we need to reconnect it with our relatives in north and south. That is the first step. I don't mean we have to do exclusive life outside the world. This is the first step. We need to do this. When we do this, we got to get more power in order to keep walking. So that's my understanding, the encounter between eagle and condor. I wish to have your opinion, your perspective. What do you think about this perspective between us, like indigenous people?
I think it's beautiful. We are one of the same. We have very similar origination stories. We have the same worldview, our connection with the cosmic world. We have the same connection with Grandmother the Earth. And the eagle flies the highest, sees the furthest, and is faithful to its mate. That's one of the things that one of the reasons that we revere the eagle in such a way. And as Russell used to say, the headdresses that have the eagle feathers, that was very significant because that's where our brain is housed. So that's the association that we want, is that knowledge, what that eagle represents. I feel like, in addition to how you beautifully, eloquently stated that relationship, I feel like we are now in the process of reconnecting, fulfilling those prophecies, because we're in this new energy, this fifth world energy, that resonates with everything that you're saying. So in this new energy, it is no longer compatible with aggression. And with all of those constructs that the invader forced upon not just us, but humanity. It started with us. And I feel like this is a time of truth. It's a time of reconciliation. And it's a time of hope. And it's a time to move forward, to embrace this new reality, because it's happening, because we're inhabitants of our grandmother, the earth, and she is cleansing and moving forward, evolving. And if we're going to be a part of her, then we too have to make these changes and that's opening our heart. That's being honest. That's moving with integrity and respect. And most importantly, love. It's a beautiful time.
Thank you a lot for all these your beautiful words. And if you want to give a last message to people in the Andean culture in Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, what you can say?
My message is, I love you, brothers and sisters. Russell Means had a great deal of love. In fact, Rigoberta Menchú was sent to the American Indians when Russell and his contemporaries had established the United Nations, an office to work with the United Nations in New York City, the International Indian Treaty Council. Rigoberta was sent there at 18, couldn't speak English. I can only imagine how that must have felt coming from Guatemala and what she had just experienced. And as Russ would call it, the belly of the beast, America and New York City. And they took her and nurtured her, and the rest is history. But they were very, very close, Russell and Rigoberta. We were there in Mexico City 2 years in a row. They were hosting this beautiful conference of the Indigenous from Brazil to Canada. And that was in Russell, when he spoke, he talked about matriarchy. He talked about grabbing a hold of our children through immersion, language, culture, all of that, and really kind of helped set the tone. And it was really quite a beautiful experience. And Rigoberta graced us with her beauty, her energy, and it was a real homecoming. And the two of them had great conversations. And Russell's love and Rigoberta's love, it was the manifestation of the male and the female energy of our peoples and the oppression and genocide and everything that's happened to us. And yet here are these two very, very powerful human beings that just radiated love for our people. And I just, I'm emotional when I think about that, because I felt it. And that is what I say to all of my relatives. Don't forget who you are. You come from a beautiful, powerful, ancient culture, philosophy, way of life. The invader did everything in his power to destroy us. And he didn't. We're still here. And we're still radiating those truths. And let's start, each one of us, as Russell said to us in that ceremony in Canada, each one of you emanates a beautiful light. My message about freedom and sovereignty is with the individual. That's powerful. It starts with us. Let's regain our sovereignty. You know, he often said, you want to be sovereign? Act sovereign. Don't wait for the white man. Don't wait for the oppressor to give you permission. You know who you are. Be it. Let's be it. And I want to come and visit you. I want to speak to you. I want to eat your foods. I want to share with you. My heart is open. And thank you for holding that light as you have. And it's time for us to come together and share with humanity. Mitaki oasin.